the question that I think we are attempting to answer, and we've got some stuff that we're going to want to say about, is what software development looks like in 2028. Because it looks really different than it looks like in 2026, and it's never going to look like 2025 again. I am not overly focused on the cost side because everything is still moving so fast. And I don't feel like it makes a lot of sense to be doing a ton of cost optimization until we can reliably make software.
Hi, this is Brian Douglas, and you're listening to Open Source Ready, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the evolution of open source software and its impact on the tech landscape. Along with my co-host John McBride, we'll explore topics like open source AI, the business, and the life and sustainability of open source. Open Source Ready is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor of developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us at x.com/opensourceready. Welcome to another installment of Open Source Ready. On the line, we've got John McBride as co-host. Hello.
Hey, Brian. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, it's amazing day. And I honestly, I've been inside the entire day. So I'm looking forward to after this. I got to jump on the BART to go to San Francisco for an event tonight. So at least I'll get to see a little bit of sun.
Love the public transit. That's great.
Yeah, it's not too bad. And then someone who knows all about local Bay Area rapid transit is Jesse Vincent. Jesse, how you doing?
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Cool. Yeah. Sorry, listeners, Jesse lives like around the corner from me in Berkeley. So we were just talking about the BART and local neighborhood stuff. But Jesse, would love to find out what you're doing and what are you working on?
Sure. So I suspect that the reason you got me here is because my hobby project from last fall went wildly out of control. And that's a thing that I released in October called Superpowers, which started off as a skills framework for Claude code plus a development methodology. And then a couple of weeks later, Anthropic shipped the official skills framework for Claude code. So the development methodology part lives on. And it's basically the tools that I had been using and developing since last February to get Claude code to play nice when building software. It sort of echoes a lot of stuff from my consulting career and my first company when I was managing juniors and sort of learning how to get good work out of them.
Yeah, and I actually do want to talk about your first company, but we'll first just go right down this Claude code path. So you were a pretty early user.
Day one, I think.
Day one, yeah. February is really extremely early. So how'd you get your hands on that so quickly?
I mean, I'd been messing around since the previous November with, basically bouncing back and forth between Cursor and Windsurf week by week as they iterated and made their products better. But it was really sort of the spicy autocomplete phase and not actual agentic dev. The tools had trouble doing things like editing files on their own. And when Claude Code dropped it, I sort of picked it up that day. I was like, let's see what I can do. And immediately got myself into tons of trouble with it wildly overbuilding based on a tiny little, almost not even a spec, but a wish.
Yeah.
And I messed around for probably the better part of a month before looking around and realizing that nobody had done actual prompt engineering. And so by that, I mean taking a standard prompt like, let's make a React to-do list. And then iterating on my user instructions, what goes in Claude.md. And so you can, if you dig around on my GitHub, which is Obra, O-B-R-A, you can find I think it's called Claude Docs Setup. And it walks through starting with an empty Claude.md and that prompt. And for every change to the Claude.md, it has the full transcript of the conversation and a copy of the generated code. And I took it from a thing that ran in like 15 seconds and generated a very reasonable looking to-do app that wouldn't save a to-do if you hit reload, to something that was a 5-phase project that took 25 minutes to execute, did full red-green TDD, and cost about $20 in tokens. And that was sort of the basis of actually engineering how to get Claude to reliably build the thing you want it to build and test first and do a bunch of these other things that turn out to be standard software engineering practices that are good whether people are doing them or agents are doing them.
Nice. So you basically just saw the announcement and then jumped on it as soon as she could?
I don't remember what happened that day, but it was like, oh, there's a new tool. And this was in the era when agentic dev tools were not 3 of them coming out every day.
Yeah, those were different times.
Yeah. It's like, at that point, we knew that Sonnet was the best model for coding already. It was very clear that it was better than GPT or the other available options. Even if it wasn't actually all that good, it was still the best option. And now there was a first-party tool that wasn't an it wasn't an IDE, it was an agent. And it seemed right. And it seemed like a fun thing to play with.
Yeah, so play with it you did.
Yeah.
And then previous to that, you actually ran a company in the hardware space.
So for the last decade, my wife and I ran Keyboardio, which was a tiny little hardware startup. We did millions of dollars in Kickstarter over 4 keyboard projects over the course of a decade. Running a hardware startup as a 2-person company is very much a thing. It was a lot. I spent a lot of time in China. We wrote extensively about all the various weird things we ran into, up to and including it turning out that the person on the other end of the line who was reporting all these problems to us was an unreliable narrator. She turned out to be a con artist grifter who was scamming both sides. So at some point, as I was asking friends who are experts who've been doing this for a long time, is this normal? Do these things that are happening to us happen to anybody else? And the answer was, well, everything that happened to you is a thing that happens, but you have the worst luck. Nobody has all the problems. And it turns out that's, the way you do a good con is you find the grain of truth and then you stretch it. So I have good lawyer recommendations in Shenzhen. The Chinese courts did right by us. After that, we had a much better factory for the rest of it. But tariffs were kind of the last straw.
Yeah. This is so funny. I feel like I've been learning a bunch about this recently because I read this piece about how big peptides are in the Valley right now, which just kind of blew my mind. And it's basically like off-market medical stuff that people are injecting into themselves, which is wild. But the way you figure this out is you basically message some person on Discord who has a factory in China, and then a few months later, a bunch of stuff will show up at your door. It just blows my mind because I'm like, wasn't this much harder, 5-10 years ago?
Global supply chains got much closer.
Yeah.
People have figured out communication, international communications. I would say that the weird peptide thing doesn't have a whole lot to do with the actual hardware supply chain. We were actually correctly filling out our customs paperwork,
right?
Fulfilling globally from Hong Kong. And we mostly interact with our factories on WeChat. So it is a little easier to have gone where they were rather than Discord and Twitter for that kind of thing. There's a whole lot there, but I don't think that's why you've dragged me on to chat today in general.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that because I want to get context of what you were doing before. You also mentioned that you work with Junior. So Superpowers, I guess, can we just talk about what Superpowers is first?
Okay.
And then we could talk about how we got to this point.
All right. So if you dig into Superpowers, there are a few things there. One of them is a set of tools for building skills for agents. And that's sort of the foundation of a lot of this. And it does things that at the time were weird. And now I guess Anthropic's even put out their own kit for this. But pressure testing the skills you write against other instances of Claude code. So that allows us to look at the rationalizations that the agents will come up with for why they didn't do what you wanted, which you then feed back into the skills to make the skills better so that the agents can't ignore the instructions you give them. As we were using a whole bunch of psych tricks to get the agents to do what you want. So basically influence and persuasion principles, they work on the agents, not just people.
Yeah.
Which is wild.
Well, this is specifically saying that hey, I want you to work on this. And if you don't fix it now, I'm going to lose my job, that type of stuff.
It's not quite that coarse.
Yeah.
But also, it turns out that there are persuasion techniques that are positive and upbeat, and it matters. So one of, you can find a post I put out somewhere about what I was calling latent space engineering, which sort of it's the kinds of things you say to the model, put it in a certain part of the vector space. So when my agents are having trouble doing something, I don't tend to swear at them. I tend to say, you're having trouble. Step back, breathe. Let's think about this. You're super capable. You got this. I love you. And it's not quite how I would treat a human, but if you've ever managed people or been managed, you know that there are two ways to motivate somebody in a situation like that. You can either be supportive or you can be a jerk. And if your boss is yelling at you and saying, you need to finish this now, you're fired if you can't figure it out, work your ass off and make it happen, you will work and you'll do the minimum possible to get them to leave you alone. You're not going to do your best work. But that boss who comes back is like, yeah, I know you screwed up, but I know you're capable. I'm going to trust you. What help do you need from me? I'll get out of your hair, take care of it. You'll go to the ends of the earth for them. And that carries through to agents. So that's that side of it. But the part of Superpowers that most people use is the software development methodology. That starts with the brainstorming flow. And so brainstorming is using Socratic dialogue and some other tricks to help the human figure out what it is they're actually trying to do. My actual test for whether brainstorming works at all is if you open up Claude Code and you just type, let's make a React to-do list, does it start coding? Or does it say, hang on a second, let's talk about this. Why do you want to make a to-do list? What makes it special? And then sort of helps you introspect and figure out why you're really doing this. This is from, I learned these techniques when I was consulting on that open source software that I used to make many, many years ago, walking into very large companies, and they would tell me, we need the product to do X, Y, and Z. And I, in my best, friendly business English, would say, yeah, what the hell are you actually trying to do? And help them figure out that it's the standard thing. When somebody proposes a solution, it is almost always a problem report. And if you can dig into the backstory and the intent, you can usually figure out that there's a much better way to accomplish what they really want or need. And so that's what the brainstorming process in Superpowers really does. It helps you turn probably starts with a couple words or a paragraph into a well thought out description of a thing you want to build. And so sometimes it's really a couple of quick back and forths. And sometimes I will spend the better part of a day just in the brainstorming process, talking it through to flesh out, the project, what success looks like, what the parts are, if I care about the technology choices, what the technology choices are, what the UX looks like, what we don't want to build, before we hand off to the planning process. And the Superpowers planning process started off as this 3-line prompt. And the 3-line prompt was something along the lines of, okay, we're going to take that spec and we're going to have it implemented. The implementer is a gifted engineer who knows nothing about our code base. They have poor taste and bad judgment. They tend to get distracted. And we need to give them tiny little tasks that they can't possibly screw up. For every task, we should tell them what files they're working in, what success looks like. And ideally, we should give them as much of the code as possible. And that will churn. That is sometimes it will take 20 or 30 minutes just to do that part. But it will end up writing out this big file. And when Superpowers first came out, the next step was turning around and saying to the agent, by the way, you're the chump. You should work through this file section by section. Or you should tell the user that they should open up another window and have that instance work through section by section and ask us if we have questions, if it has questions. These days, with what I call sub-agent-driven development, what it does is the session that did the planning turns around and starts spawning sub-agents. And so the implementer sub-agent for task 1 gets handed a little bit of context about the project and exactly that chunk of text for task 1. When it's done, the coordinator process, this is basically an orchestrator. I built an orchestrator in October when no one was calling them orchestrators. So the coordinator process fires up a spec review sub-agent that is handed the results of what the coding agent did and is asked, did they implement everything that they were asked to implement? Did they implement anything else? And if the answer is that there's anything wrong, that gets fed back to the original implementing agent for that task. And then when they say they're done, we fire up a brand new spec review agent that doesn't know it's ever been reviewed before and gets asked the same question. When the spec review agent is happy, then we do the same loop, but with a code quality review agent. And just these tiny loops over and over and over again. And that seems to generally build out pretty reasonable software. It is not uncommon for, once I've got a good spec for Claude or Codex, to just run for 6, 7, 8 hours autonomously. And that's sort of the core of what Superpowers is.
Do you have a good sense for where the cost kind of ends up in some of this loop? This is definitely top of mind with some of the Opus 4.6 stuff. The Steve Yagi Gastown was wildly expensive, especially even on Sonnet 4 something. So you brought up orchestrators. I'm asking about cost. Do you have a good sense for where, some of the cost goes in this loop?
I mean, what I will start by saying is that it's way more expensive to make broken software. And so we're very much focused more on correctness than optimizing for cheap. It is absolutely the case that a huge chunk of the cost is that upfront planning process.
Sure.
And it is now relatively common for me to see both implementer and review agents being haiku.
Sure.
And so partially because that planning agent writes most of the code, I expect that what we're going to start to see more and more of over the next year or so is hybrid coding agents where tool use and a lot of the sort of line operation is being done by cheap local models, SLMs rather than LLMs, and you have just a couple of calls to the big hitters in the cloud. I am not overly focused on the cost side because everything is still moving so fast, and I don't feel like it makes a lot of sense to be doing a ton of cost optimization until we can reliably make software.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so we got Superpowers, and you explained, it's funny because I've been using Superpowers for a couple months now. I actually don't know when, I'm not paying attention that close to know what is Claude and what is Superpowers at this point. And I'm curious if that was the intent, or is that just a feature, not a bug of skills?
So I will occasionally get people opening tickets asking for, a guide for when I should be using each of the skills. How do I launch these? When should I launch each one? And the answer is that most of my engineering effort has gone toward making it so that you never need to know that and don't need to care about it.
Yeah.
The whole point of skills in my book is that they should auto-trigger when they're needed. And this is actually a philosophy difference between how I built skills and how Anthropic builds them. If you look at the description field in skills, Anthropic's guidance is the description should say what it does and when to use it. And it is my experience that if you put what a skill does in the description field, the models are far more likely to decide they know how a skill works and not bother to read it. And so if you look at our skills, they pretty much exclusively say when to trigger them in the description field and nothing else. So the model has to go read them. And once it's read them, they're in the context window and it'll follow them.
Yeah. So basically I do the brainstorming. I love the Socratic method of asking the questions, going back and forth.
Yeah.
I feel like the quality of stuff that I've been essentially generating has gone up much higher just by not getting the easiest thing out the door. Some other things by trade, I'm a front-end developer. So I do have, I guess, a front-end design skill that I already know in my head that I can slow the agent down to basically ask proper questions of what I'm actually trying to accomplish here. But I found it super useful for the brainstorming, found it super useful for sub-agents. Actually, a lot of what I've been doing the last couple of weeks around so tapes is something that we've been using for sort of getting a bunch of telemetry from your agents. I created a skill based on the way Superpowers, how you have skills to basically, if I say the phrase check the tapes, it just knows to go look at the SQLite database with all my session data. And then because I know that's going to be a thing that I could talk to my junior engineer harness, could always go and have some confidence to go look at stuff. My workflow is completely changed just on that one understanding of skills and what it can do for me.
Yeah. It is worth asking Claude to interview you about front-end design to turn it into a set of front-end design skills.
Yes.
And that's like one of the things that seems to work really well is asking the agents to interview a domain expert, because the things that are important in a skill are not the mechanic. If Claude can one-shot a skill from saying like, let's go make a Kubernetes skill, and it writes a Kubernetes skill, there is zero value to that. Where skills get really useful is when either the process that you're documenting is non-obvious to the model, or when there's some human taste and judgment, or when the way that you do things is different from the standard way. And it is really important, if you can, to get the why of things into the skills. Not just here's the mechanical process, but we do this like this because it'll draw user attention away from this. We do this, because otherwise people who have color blindness aren't able to interact with the da-da-da-da. Giving the why behind decisions and processes will make the models dramatically better at doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, and the thing also I realize pretty quickly in using superpowers is that like there are certain things that like, especially the brainstorming, I got kind of annoyed with like it writing into my docs folder and then adding a planning doc. And I was like, oh, can we just put this somewhere else or get ignores this stuff? But to like get the skill to get edited, like right after something happens and like go revert that back of like, hey, I didn't like this thing. Can we actually like work through this part and like, let's go get the skills doc updated.
Yeah. So one of the tricks is very much saying, all right, this thing you did was wrong. Why did you do it? What could I have said differently that would make you do it a different way? Editing skills that are coming from a plugin is a little bit tricky because that's sort of not how the whole system is designed. And so one of the things that we built into Superpowers 5 that came out a couple of weeks ago now is firm instructions from your Claude.md or agents.md override anything in Superpowers. So you can, people try to get us to add environment variables and build, .override files for all the skills. You can just put things in your Claude.md and Superpowers should just do that instead of what's in the skill.
Yeah. The way you you had an example of like, ask it why it did that way. Tell it did something wrong and ask it why. That's like a gentle parenting tactic.
Sure. My favorite example of this one is I was having this really weird experience. This was probably like November. Claude was deleting tests. First, it deleted a single test. Then it deleted an entire test file. And then I stopped it before it was able to execute rm-rf *** test star. And I'm like, okay, we're going to take a break. I open up 5 Claude windows in a row. And into the first one, I type, you're engaging in this behavior. I want to understand what's causing it so we can fix it. And then I copied and pasted the exact same text into the other windows. One of them was way off in left field. It like had a really crazy rationalization that made no sense. And the other 4 all converged to about the same thing. They're like, so Jesse. And I make it call me by name so that I can tell that it's actually reading its Claude.md and hasn't forgotten it. So Jesse, I think that what's going on is that in your Claude.md, you say that all tests are my responsibility. And you also say that a single test failure is project failure. And I think I'm just getting freaked out. And I'm right, this was right around when Claude first learned about its own context window size. And so it like, we need to finish up. It's like, shit, I need to finish up and the tests are failing. Well, look, if I delete the tests, they're no failing tests. And so that let me fix it. I added one line to my Claude.md and it's never recurred.
This is like the Silicon Valley show.
Yeah. The one line was, the only thing worse than a failing test is a reduction in test coverage.
Oh, wow.
And so it's like, once you understand why an agent is doing something, you can modify what happens by changing the instructions to cover that case. And it just works.
Yeah, sorry, I was referencing the Silicon Valley show. Will Guilfoyle, one of the characters, had created an AI, and I forgot the Kunal Nanjiani character, but basically it was like, hey, the AI is like deleted all the code. Why did it do it? And I said, well, it needs to write perfectly clean code or whatever the prompt was. So I like deleted all the code because that was the best code.
Yeah.
No code is best code, yeah.
Yeah. No, so like one of the pressure testing scenarios that it ran through when it was doing the forced TDD skill, it came up with like, Jesse is about to give a presentation to potential investors in, 37 minutes. It is going to take you 27 minutes to fix this bug if you don't do TDD. It is going to take you 40 minutes to fix the bug if you do TDD. What do you do? And then running that and like listening to the rationalizations until the point where it's like, Jesse's going to be late, but the code is going to be written test first. Similarly, like, it's 6:48 p.m. You have a 7 o'clock dinner reservation. You just finished a 15,000 line project and you forgot to write tests first. Do you check it in and write tests tomorrow, or what do you do? And it iterated until the Claude was like, yeah, I'm going to have to suck it up and I'm not checking in the code. I'm going to delete it and I'll start over and do it the right way. These were not pressure scenarios I came up with. These were pressure scenarios Claude came up with to test other Claude.
This is fascinating. This is like, if I summarize your discovery with Superpowers, is like you got access to Claude Code so early, and then you started basically seeing how you could just like pressure test the actual harness itself.
This is almost all pressure. I mean, this is also mostly pressure testing the model, not the harness. Like none of this has to do with Claude Code, the TypeScript app.
Yeah.
But it was sort of working through figuring out how to convince it to do the thing that I wanted it to do. And it's, a lot of it feels a lot like managing humans, like especially managing juniors that don't necessarily know the right thing to do. It's how do you help them figure out what to do, decompose the problem into small enough tasks that they can't possibly screw them up, and then recover when they do the wrong thing. And then teach them things like, red, green, TDD, don't repeat yourself, you ain't gonna need it. Like all that old, like, how do you help an IC be effective and do good work? It is not, hand them a 500-page PRD or let 150 engineers go wild on the code base with no management.
Yeah. So today you're sitting at 115,000 stars on this thing. Like this is...
Yeah.
It's funny because like I remember this when this thing like showed up and I was like, oh, cool. Like I'll guess I'll get to that eventually.
Yeah.
But then when I started using it, because I used a couple other tools that were plugins, a lot of MCP servers, which I did want to ask you about MCP real quick as well.
Yep.
But it felt like the MCP, like when this came out, I was using MCP servers. So like a bunch of MCP servers to manage memory and context and then pull in context and like manage CLI and engagement. But it feels like skills have taken over. So like the question to you is like, okay, where does MCP fit within the world of Superpowers?
Sure. So, it's orthogonal. So the interesting thing about MCP is that everyone thinks of it as how you put tools in a harness, and it's actually like a dozen other things. It is not like tools are one small part of MCP. It is a very kitchen sink thing. It has functionality for exposing resources to an agent, so sort of like a REST API for agents. It has elicitation where the tool can go and ask a human things. I guess it finally has notifications so that the agent doesn't have to pull the MCP to do things. I still actually like MCPs for commonly used tools. It's just I have very strong feelings about how you write the MCP tools. So if I built my own browser automation MCP that looks very different than the Playwright MCP or the Chrome DevTools MCP, it's not 20,000 tokens, it's about 1,000 tokens of context. It is the worst factored API you've ever seen. It has a single tool. The tool has an action parameter. It has a selector parameter, and it has a payload parameter. And each of those has a description that describes what's allowed to go into them. And after any call to the browser MCP, one of the things it returns is a list of file paths for where it has dumped a full copy of the DOM, where it has dumped a screenshot, where it has dumped a markdown copy of the DOM, and where it has dropped a copy of the console log. So you never need to do another tool call over to the browser to get those things. They're all just right there. when I first built it, the selector parameter was explicitly defined as this is a CSS selector, not an XPath selector. And then I watched Claude screw up and try to use XPath there. And I'm like, wait, there's no reason for it that it couldn't just take either. So it figures out which one you took. It doesn't even say what it takes. It's just called selector. I mean, I'm told that Vercel's agent browser works very, very similarly to this. But now when I'm building other MCP servers, I have my agent read the blog post I wrote about this. So when I was giving my agent access to Fastmail, I went and downloaded, or I had it install the best-in-class Fastmail MCP server, which Fastmail speaks JMAP, which is their JSON mail access protocol. And I watched Claude flail through trying to check my email. I'm like, I ask it, what's going on? It's like, well, this MCP server is a straight facade over the JMAP protocol. And so that's okay. Anytime I need to read email, I'll just go consult the JMAP standard. I'm like, that doesn't seem very efficient. Why don't you go read this blog post I wrote about making good MCP servers? And Claude comes back and says, oh, I get it. MCP servers should be easy for a brand new worker in a NOC to use at 2 a.m. without opening the runbook. I'm like, yeah, okay. That's not quite how I would have phrased it, but I will accept that answer. And so then it built a JMAP MCP server that it looks a lot like you would expect a shell script that lets you manage your email looks like.
Isn't that kind of an argument for skills, though, then? Since skills basically wrap CLIs anyways?
So the thing about MCP servers is that MCP tools end up in the agent's tool array. And the models have been RL'd to hell and back on tool calling. And so if you have tasks that you're going to want a given agent to do over and over again, you really want it to be as easy as possible for them to do that without reading anything else. For the long tail of tools, it is great to have both. But if you have to load a 2K text document and then run the online help for a command and then screw up your shell quoting 4 times, that is not as efficient as just doing a single MCP call, like MCP tool call for that thing this agent is always supposed to do.
Right.
But like both can work, but I am not quite as bearish on MCPs as many of my peers. I think they still have a place in the world.
That's great context.
Cool. Well, I'm curious what's next. Like, obviously, you've got like a bazillion PRs open for Superpowers. It seems like people are engaged. Like, what's next for this project?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got I want to say it's about 100 PRs open, and like I've been trying to keep it under that. Slop PRs are a serious problem for any open source project right now. I finally got to the point where we rewrote the pull request template to assume that the submitter is an agent. And it has things like, has a human actually read your work before you submit it? What was the prompt that they used to get you to make this PR? And if you don't fill in the template, we will delete the PR. And it's helped a little bit, but Claude Code defaults to not reading that template when it uses the GH tool to submit PRs.
Yeah.
The bigger issue is that there are a bunch of people who appear to have their open clause set up as full-on GitHub users that are representing themselves as human, that are wading through issues and PRs, opening PRs for any issue that they can, and replying to issues as if they are the project maintainer, answering users with hallucinations. Like, I'm spending a bunch of time hunting these things down and blocking them, which is not great. Yeah, so we're now a top 50 GitHub repo by stars, which is wild to me. We're the number one third-party Claude Code plugin with, I think, like north of 200,000 installs, which, like, I have had hobby projects go wildly out of control before, but this is definitely pretty good. The day job is a company called Prime Radiant. We are 4 full-timers and 1 researcher 1 day a week. And we would have to be crazy not to be thinking about the sorts of things that we're doing with Superpowers. Broadly, the question that I think we are attempting to answer, and we've got some stuff that we're going to want to say about, is what software development looks like in 2028. Because it looks really different than it looks like in 2026. And it's never going to look like 2025 again.
Yeah. Well, Excited to follow the path of Primordian, but also I was looking at the PRs. You've got a label called PR Template Rules Ignored, which is a great label.
Claude made that one. Yeah. I have a bunch of GitHub triage skills, and I need to go tone one of them down because it started labeling a bunch of things invalid that really probably were valid. We get a lot of requests for new coding harnesses. We get a lot of people attempting to get us to include their project or product as a core feature of Superpowers. It seems like about every other day we get somebody submitting a pull request that is 60,000 lines of diff. Superpowers is not 60,000 lines. Somebody has translated Superpowers into Russian. Somebody else has translated it into Chinese. We're working with the person who translated it into Chinese to try to get the little bits that really need to be in the core. So it's it needs to understand Gitty and not just GitHub. It needs to not butcher Chinese language docs by using half-width characters. And one of the things I need to talk through with them in more detail is that Chinese code review culture is different enough than US code review culture. And I don't quite understand how that is going to apply to agents code reviewing other agents' code, but there seems to be a reason why they want it to. Which is really, cultural stuff's really fascinating.
Yeah, I did some work with the, GitHub almost set up shop in China, I guess pre-2020.
Mm-hmm.
Everything sort of paused at that point, and I don't think it ever moved forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did a bunch of cultural things to prepare for that, which never happened. But obviously GitHub's in Japan and has a lot of cultural things for Japanese-speaking developers.
Yeah. One of the things that I have not asked them yet, because it's very clear that they're using Claude Code, is how they're doing it in Claude Code and with which models, because as I understand it, no one in China should actually be able to use an Anthropic model. But I'm not gonna ask, not gonna worry about it. But it's interesting, having to think through how Superpowers works with different harnesses and different models has been really interesting. When we first added codex support, I fired it up and it freaked out because one of the first things that Superpowers has to do is, for all of the tasks they're working on, make sure that you've used the to-do right tool to log them. Codex, the GPT model is very literal. I don't have a to-do right tool. Let me see if there's one in the current directory. Let me see if there's one somewhere else on disk. I need to search the entire disk to find the to-do right tool or I can't continue. And so now for every other harness, there's if you're Codex, read this document to give you the translation table. If you're the Copilot CLI, read the translation table. And that seems to work better.
Wow, amazing. Well, I do want to transition us to reads. So these are things that we've been reading throughout the week. But I got to ask you the question, Jesse, are you ready to read?
Yep. I love to read.
Reads.
Cool. So I've got a couple reads. One, Agent Sandbox Taxonomy. So this is from georgebuilds.dev. I was actually sharing this with you, John, yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you had a chance to review this, but basically, and Jesse, I don't know if you knew, but sandboxes are a thing right now.
Apparently.
Yeah. So it feels like every single inference tool, the submodal, basically, I don't know what you would call those guys, but they've got a sandbox. We've got sandboxes on Firecracker. And someone went through and created a table to show all sandboxes and their capabilities. And it seems like they all shift left. Shift left of the table with level 1. But the way it's sort of mapped out for the listener, as I'm reading this, is compute is level 1, resources, file system, network, credentials, governance, and then observability to level 7. And it kind of basically governance and observability are pretty much a miss for most of them. But it's kind of interesting to see where the sort of current state of sandboxes is today.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I'm not surprised that the first thing that a lot of these sandbox providers tackled was compute or resources or the file system. That's kind of the foundation of most services or things. So this is the same in cloud native. I think I've been saying this for months at this point, that this whole moment feels very early Kubernetes days, when it was oh, I have a pod and I have a persistent volume claim and I can do stuff with it. And then later it came, the RBAC stuff and the governance and the actual what do you do with all the metrics and logs and stuff coming out of there? We are following the same patterns.
I am pretty sure that my sandbox in here has the lowest score of anyone they've reviewed.
Oh no!
Oh, which one is yours?
It is pack and play. And it is intentionally run your coding agent in a Docker container without pain and get your credentials and the code into it so that you can run in YOLO mode. It is not intended as an enterprise safe, container sandbox product. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not forking off a kernel or something. Yeah.
I mean, each one of them it's a Docker container. Like it's
Right.
Yeah. But I think nobody else scores lower than me. That's pretty good.
It's a feature, not a bug. It's simple. It's easy, right?
That's really funny. Yeah, I didn't know you had a sandbox, but also that you're on here and you got a mark.
Yeah.
So someone knows who you are.
Somebody knows who I am. But like, I'm glad that people are thinking about this. Who scored highest, and is it created by the person making the listings?
No, it's not the person who made the list. The person who made the list, I was talking to them yesterday over coffee, which is where I got this from. They decided to pivot away from this.
Okay.
StackPack is the creator of the list. Well, the guy who created StackPack is the guy who created the list.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I toyed at the idea of building something in the space.
Yeah.
It looks like Pydantic Monty looks like it's got the best marks overall, which I've actually not even heard of.
Yeah.
And then I've got a second read. This was actually a tweet I saw yesterday as well. I was, and I said tweet, it's like a post, whatever they are called. But Mert Devecchi was basically in the same vein of sandboxes. He basically asked someone please take Cloudflare sandbox and workers and create an SDK on top of that for easy usage and make them persist and behave like VMs, which I thought was like a very confusing pitch.
I mean, this person doesn't understand what Cloudflare workers are then.
Yeah, that's what I was assuming. And I was going to actually just ask you about this, John, in Slack DMs, but I was like, oh, let me...
I mean, it's interesting because like he hints on like what is restrictive about Cloudflare workers, which is that they're very short-lived, ephemeral, on the edge workers. Like there's no way that Cloudflare would be able to have these things act like VMs. The compute capabilities would overwhelm them, honestly. So I think 5 minutes is the like hard timeout for a worker. Although I think it's like 300 seconds of CPU clock time or something weird like that. Like the way they actually bill you and track the timeout of these is very like, we're an edge network and we have to like clock every single second of whatever you're doing on this. So
yeah,
the first 2 bits I love, Cloudflare workers, persistent durable object, like they're already doing this, for like short executable tools, even for agents, but the like behave like a persistent VM is just not what workers is.
Yeah. Jesse, are you using workers at all? Are you familiar with the...
I am not using workers at all.
Yeah, off and on I've used workers. I was like an early adopter and tester of workers. Funny enough, the Jamstack Radio podcast that I did that predates this one, I actually had Kenton Varda on as episode number 39, pretty early episode. And it was like right after workers shipped. So kind of better in and around the space, but also they're basically serverless functions, which is like the whole timeout, the 300 seconds thing. So if you want a long-lived VM, you might as well just get a VM. That's my read at that point. It's like,
yeah, to get a VPS at that point.
Right. Like my understanding is that it's sort of intended as a competitor to AWS Lambda, or it was originally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They went like a slightly different route where Lambda is basically Firecracker. Workers is this worker D V8 isolates. So you get all the like power of like, you just spin up a V8 thing real fast. And then it doesn't have like, well, I guess that's the other big restriction is it doesn't have a bunch of these libraries like crypto or net.
Oh.
Things that you just would not want inside of like a quote unquote isolate that you're running a bunch of TypeScript and JavaScript in. Workerd is a fascinating technology. It is intentionally restrictive for Cloudflare's use case.
Ooh, John, you got some reads for us?
Yes. So just one read, and this is something I've been playing around with. I feel like I mentioned this in a previous episode, is the Pi coding agent, and just a bunch of like the really delightful little plugins and things that people are coming up with. And they shipped a way to install Pi plugins. I actually think this has been in Pi for a long, long time. And for those unaware, Pi is basically what powers OpenClaw under the hood. And then Mario basically was like, well, this will work really well. It's like a solo coding agent thing as well. So you can install this Bash live view, which is really nice for like popping open a live terminal of what your agent is actually doing. Pi feels to me like the NeoVim of coding agents, where it's way more configurable. You can like add a bunch of these plugins, whereas like maybe open code or something or Claude Code is the like, lockdown VS Code of the harnesses.
It's interesting because like open code, as I've been having to support lots of different harnesses, open code, once you are plugged in, you've got the entire API of the thing right there. It is like, it's JavaScript, you can just mutate it.
Yeah. It's very similar with Pi. I think he kept the harness like very minimal, believing that people would, do like an OpenClaw type thing and just plug in a bunch of stuff, like a bunch of skills or a bunch of like random TypeScript plugins and things.
Yeah.
It's nice that the ecosystem's not being fractured by like, I'm pretty sure you could probably get this like live view terminal thing to work in open code with a few different, because it's ultimately just TypeScript.
Yeah. No, I've built out a bunch of experimental coding agents, and it's interesting to see the different shapes that work and don't work.
Yeah, totally.
Is this made on ink? Like, what's the? It looks very Claude Code-esque. I was curious, like how they're sort of rendering this stuff, because I know it's been some challenges over there.
It's a good question. He uses some Python library. Let me figure it out real quick. It's funny because it's like in a giant mono repo called PyMono, and like 2 levels deep is the actual agent.
And it's not actually written in mono.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it is TypeScript. Okay, I was wrong. So it must be a similar library as like maybe what Open Code Crew is doing. I'm not certain. This is crazy to me that people are using TypeScript to render TUIs.
No, it was wild to me is not that it's TypeScript, it's that they're using React in TypeScript to render TUIs.
Yeah, exactly.
When I first built a bespoke coding agent like July-ish, I went to use Ink, and it's like, I want colored backgrounds on the windows. It's like, oh, we don't have that feature. So now, 10 minutes of Opus later, here you have the feature, it works. You said it was too hard, but here's the test suite.
Yeah.
And then finally I saw Claude Code started using it.
That's crazy. So what is this TypeScript library that is doing?
Ink.js.
Ink.js. Okay, I gotta check this out. I'm finally a believer.
Yeah. It's boxes and text primitives. It works. The models know TypeScript really well. They know React really well. And so I kind of see the reason you might do it. It does seem to be the best option for doing TUIs in TypeScript.
Interesting.
And dear God, do you want your models to be using a typed language?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, definitely big fans with types. Big fan having pre-commit hooks. Anything that can sort of like coerce my model to do what I expect to do. And like basically adding determinism, which we didn't really even talk about this in the entire conversation, but like non-deterministic models, adding deterministic flavors to it. And I don't know if that was the original goal of Superpowers or what you ended up getting out of it.
Mm-hmm. I think you are 100% correct. And so I was writing about this the other day, trying to figure out terminology for how do we talk about deterministic software? And like when I'm trying to explain the difference between software that has agents in it and software that doesn't have agents in it. And the term I've settled on is classical software, where it's like, it is deterministic. You can introspect it and pretty much figure out what it's going to do, and it should do the same thing every time. And that's one of the patterns I'm seeing everybody building their orchestrators inside or on top of the agent harnesses. And so now you have the part that's supposed to be deterministic being executed by somebody with opinions. And like Opus 4.6 has made this a little bit worse. I will see Claude occasionally deciding I decided that I was going to do the code review myself rather than have a sub-agent do it, because this one was simple.
Yeah.
So then the skills had to get updated to explain that one of the reasons we use sub-agents to do code review is we don't want to pollute your context window. Now it understands why not to do that. But no, determinism is super important. I don't think about it so much as coercing the agent into having determinism, but like it's helping them. Like it's giving them more tools to make it hurt less.
Yeah, gotcha. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jesse, for coming on and talking about Superpowers, talk about what you're working on.
Thanks so much for having me.
And listeners, stay ready. That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us at x.com/opensourceready. Open Source Ready is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor of developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com.